There we go, and share today's screen. And welcome everybody to today's weekly roundtable. And it's a leadership roundtable, all focused on how we can humanize transformation to accelerate success and achieve agile at scale, because those are the things that we want, isn't it? Today's agenda is a little bit of a follow-on from last week. Last week, we went into the 7 mindsets and thought about the concept of a flow path. And what I want to do this week is I want to kind of expand that conversation and share with you 3 techniques from anthropology that can supercharge your transformation, one of which, of course, we talked about last week, but again, going to expand on that too. So that's what this week is all about. It's 3 elements of anthropology that supercharges our transformation. And as always, a little bit of a quote from cxm.com this week to get our juices flowing and our mindsets in the present moment for today's subject. And what a great quote I think this is. Businesses and organizations are really starting to recognize the power and value of anthropology in transformation and change. So much so that Google and Microsoft are always looking for and employing anthropologists to support their work in terms of design and product development. So it's really, really important for us as change practitioners and leaders of transformation to tap into and understand anthropological techniques for business and change. Really important. And this quote for me is powerful because it talks to the fact that, you know, and we mentioned it briefly last week, the data that is observable to us and visible to us will never be able to tell us why people do what they do, the real why behind the human. And that's so incredibly important, because if we can understand that, that's what this is all about. So 3 techniques from anthropology that we should be applying to transformation. Now, the 3 techniques that I want to talk about are observation, description, and perspective. If I want to be a little bit clever, I would say that observation technically should say ethnographic research. Description should actually say thick description. And perspective should actually say emic perspective. But if I'd have put that down there today, we probably all would have gone, what's she talking about? So in us, for our work in practice in the world of leading transformation and change, we want to simplify this so that we can apply these 3 highly technical techniques in the design and delivery of whatever we're doing, whether it's a digital transformation for you, Anna, whether it's a leadership program for you, Lorraine, whether it's a cultural piece for you, Joanna. It's irrelevant. We do need to understand these. So let's look at the first one. So the first one, observation. I mean, I'm not being funny, but it's just about hanging out. And so often we head straight to design and delivery without just hanging out with the people as a participant. And I think it's really important for us, even if we're doing it for a small period of time, to go and hang out as a participant with the people who we are serving in our transformation. And it doesn't matter what that means, but it's just thinking about yourself as a participant and giving yourself the time and space and permission to hang out with them. That sounds so obvious, but just as a tiny little stop moment for us all, when was the last time we did that in the design and delivery of something? To actually, number 1, think of ourselves as a participant, and number 2, go and hang out with the people. It's so powerful and simple. The other element is what I really wanted to expand on from last week. So last week, we talked about the concept of flow path. Now, in order for us to get to flow path, when we see ourselves as a participant, when we are hanging out with people, there are ways that we can extract data. And we can extract the visible data in order for us then to inquire about the invisible data, if you remember from last week. So what we really want to do is we want to understand the 4 ways that anthropologists use, the 4 techniques that they use to extract and to document observable data. So it's 4 techniques based on controlled, naturalistic, participatory, and technical. Now, just bear with me 1 second. Number 1, I just want to say hi to Isra. So really great to see you again this week, Isra. I'm just going to make sure that I don't have, yeah, look at that. Isn't that interesting? I just got to make sure that we don't have any transitions at all. Apply to all, and then I can pop back into our slideshow. Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you for that. So how do we extract this data in order for us to really understand what is visible and what's going on? So there is controlled data observation, naturalistic data observation, participatory data observation, which I've just hinted at, and technical. So let's look at each one of those in a little bit more detail. Controlled observational data is when we are standardizing what data we are capturing. And the way that we do that is we can create a controlled environment. So as a very simple example, you might be part of a digital transformation that is moving from on-premise technology to cloud. So it might be maybe an Oracle or an SAP payroll system, an HR system. So you're moving, you're bringing in a new piece of technology, and you're moving, you're wanting to move behaviors. So what you want to do is you want to understand what those current behaviors are. And what you can do is you can create a controlled environment to capture that data. So something simple that you might want to do is you might want to get to assign maybe 10 people, put them in a boardroom for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and just ask them to work out of that boardroom. So they're doing exactly the same normal behaviors as they would in their natural environment, but you're putting them in a controlled laboratory environment. So it's controlled. And the reason you're doing that is because you are able to then, at various times, standardize and capture consistent and repeated data. So that's a controlled technique that anthropologists use. So it's getting the humans to be in a place where you are able to standardize the data. Now we can do that. It's not necessarily the most authentic, but it does give us a depth that we wouldn't get if we were just doing normal observation or persona work. So it's really good one. The next piece is naturalistic. And naturalistic is where we would assign somebody to go into the environment and observe it. And if you've got time on your hands, that is a fantastic one to use. It takes longer, and also the data that that individual will be observing will be what we call unstructured. Because what you're asking them to do is you're asking them to document what people say and what people do and how they say it and how they do it in an unstructured way, in a free flow way. So you're not standardizing it, whereas you haven't got checks and measures as you would have in a controlled environment if you've got some people perhaps in a boardroom. So naturalistic, unstructured instead of structured, takes longer, but what we're extracting in terms of data is deeper. So if we've got the time to do it, fantastic. The third one, which is arguably the one that we always want to lean into ourselves, is participatory. And participatory is when we become one of the end users, when we become a true participant. So we live and breathe in that world with them. And if you think about one of the famous anthropologists, which is Fossey, that went in to work with the gorillas, she became one of the community, one of the culture, one member of the family. She was taken on board. What that allowed her to do is it allowed her to get to the real depth of what people say, what people do, in terms of the gorillas, their communication and their behaviors. So the what and the how, what's visible. And that participatory is fantastic if we have time. And what I would say is, at any given moment, it would be fantastic for us to have the opportunity to sporadically go and participate, to immerse ourselves with our users. And it could be a midway point in our transformation, but for us to have space allocated in our transformation plans, in our strategies, in our timelines, however long they are, to have participatory moments, really interesting. Now, I'm throwing out a little bit of a challenge here specifically to Anna, because that is something that would be really interesting for you to think about how you could implement that, not necessarily for yourself, but maybe a member of your team, in terms of key milestone milestone timings across the tenure of a digital transformation. Really interesting. The fourth element is what we call technical, and technical is the easiest data for us to capture, because it is data that we capture from technology. It's data that we can capture from the technologies that people are using, which is probably the most familiar to all of you, because you probably have done a little bit of this in some way, shape or form, right? But the key thing is, can you balance past and present future? Can you capture past and present future, or are you only capturing past data? That's the first challenge I throw to you. The second challenge I throw to you, which actually isn't written down here, which is really important, is, can you capture qualitative data as well as quantitative data? So you can capture how many times somebody went into Teams yesterday, but are you capturing what they are doing when they are inside of Teams, what conversations they are having, how long they are spending in Teams in terms of dwell time? So are you capturing qualitative as well as quantitative data? Are you able to capture real-time data as well as past historic data? And what that does is it gives you a balance of structured and unstructured that you can pull into data visualization. Now, one thing I would say to you is this: it's not about choosing one of these techniques. Anthropologists try and bring richness across, you know, all of these techniques, at least two of these techniques. So I would say application of technical with one of the others would be a mandatory for us as leaders of transformation. Real mandatory. So thinking about how we are able to do that. How can we do that? What have we already got at our disposal that can allow us to do that? And then the key is monitoring and capturing this data consistently and repeatedly. Not just for the program, not just for the project, not just for this particular phase, but consistently. And if we can start monitoring this data on an ongoing basis, then we're starting to build a much deeper picture to adapt and to pivot over time. So, you know, spiking isn't really what we want to do when it comes to observing our data capture. Now, hanging out with people, 4 techniques for observational data, but there's something else as well. We need to be aware of who we are. Now, there's something really, really important here, that, you know, anthropologists and ethnographers always have a good sense of self-awareness. Because if they have a good sense of self-awareness, that means they can hold that to one side and not apply assumption. They can be curious like a child. They can see things with fresh eyes. And it's a beautiful quote that Gillian Tett gives in her book, Anthrovision, is to see the world through the eyes of a child. And that's the secret of real data capture when it comes to anthropology and ethnography. Not to bring ourselves into data capture and observation, but to leave ourselves outside because we've done some work on our own self-awareness, and to be able to bring a child's mind of curiosity into what we're observing and what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and how. Really interesting one, isn't it? Be curious like a child. So the second element that I want to talk about today is description. And what I mean by that is, how do we, with this data that is observable, then start to build a picture and stories that are holistic human stories that we can put into our strategies, into our design, accelerate transformation, achieve agile at scale. So what do I mean by that? Well, it is exactly what we talked about last week. It is to uncover the data that is invisible. It is to get to the why of every human being. Inside the data that is inside every human being, that is only true to them. So when we have observed, when we have applied that ethnographic research and got that data, then what we want to do is speak to people, create space and time that people are able to share their why. Super important. And last week I shared with you an important element of inquiry, not to use the how word or the why word, to actually have sentences that are more open. Explain more about that. Tell me about that situation. The moment that you put the word, how do you do that? Or why do you do that? Even though we're told in culture work and change management to use those words in our inquiry, they limit the individual. What we want to do in terms of expanding how and how we make the invisible visible is to use more expansive and more open questioning. So using explain more about, tell me more about, are much better ways of opening conversation to uncover people's why. And if we can do that, then that means that our inquiry will be deeper and we will understand values and purpose and rituals and drivers. That's stuff that happens on the left-hand side of this screen. So that really allows us to be person-driven, not persona-driven. And I urge every single one of you, when you are working on any design or any strategy around change and transformation or development, if you see persona, if you see data that is assumption, we've got this data and we think the reason why our people do this or say this is because of that. Challenge it, apply critical thinking to it, because you need to have truth in that data in order for you to really meet people where they're at. And that's how we can accelerate transformation. So, excuse me, those three flow paths, excuse me, that I mentioned last week, I've popped them into this week's slides as well, because I think it's really important for us to have an understanding of what being participatory in how we think, applying those 4 techniques of anthropology to our data capture and to question and inquire. It's really important for us to take those 3 things together and recognize that we want to build an archive of flow paths, to build an archive of flow paths. Excuse me. Thank you. Nice hot cup of tea. Really important for us. So I've kept those flow paths in there from last week. Now, the final thing I want to talk about today is perspective. And if we have observed, captured data, if we are able to then use that data to inquire in order to then describe the full human story, which is the flow path, we are then in a very good place to apply perspective. And the perspective that we want to put into our strategies and to use in our design is what's called emic perspective. And essentially what this means is humanized perspective, empathetic perspective, real empathetic perspective. So the way that we do that is to understand that it's not about a single culture as it is about the subcultures that are manifesting in our human systems. And those flow paths give us an opportunity to add context to that. Now, I'm working at the moment with a very large, complex IT department in an organization. Now, from an organizational perspective, everybody would assume that there's one culture for this organization. This organization has one set of values, and our values are open and authentic, blah, 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 blah. So everybody is surely operating to those values of our organization and to the single culture. But we now know that in this IT team, there are about 3 or 4 different subcultures happening. We've got one team, for example, that they are a team that are described as developers. They're software developers, so they've got software development backgrounds. They're trained in a particular way of thinking and doing and being. And then over here we've got a group of people that are network architects, and you know, they're about the process and keeping the lights on for the organization and keeping everybody safe. And then over here we've got people that work on cybersecurity and data, you know, and they're really focused on, you know, hacks and risk and vulnerabilities and all of that. And what we've noticed is, regardless of the fact that the organization has got a set of single values and they're looking at one culture, in this IT department we have 3 very distinct cultures that are very different, very different. So it's really important for us to recognize that when we've got those flow paths. And by the way, a quick hello to Stefan and to Mazine. You're coming in a little bit later on in the piece, but worry not. We're kind of like we're layering everything into what we're talking about today. So a little bit of the replay on 1.7 speed replay. I'm sure you'll be fine with us. But really, the key thing here is, once we get to a point of being able to stack flow paths and being able to really understand human stories through what we've done so far, which is ethnographic research observation, you know, thick description, which basically means why, what's hidden as well as what's visible. We get to this point. We get to this point of understanding subcultures. We get to the point of understanding where the clusters of theme and ritual are. And this is an incredibly important element of anthropology that we should be applying to the design and delivery of anything, a project or program around change, transformation, leadership, development, etc., is the subcultures. Because if we can understand these subcultures, then what we've got is we've got rich data to slice and dice design and understand what is required for who and when. So this is what we call emic description, and it's empathetic because it's telling the true story of ritual. It's telling the true story of culture. You know, another organization that I'm working with, I'm actually working with one of the leaders in this organization. Now, she is leading a particular department, and this particular department has got a very unique culture because they have a leader who's very traditional in their mindset, who's micromanaging, likes to do everything, likes to know everything, likes to make all of the decisions. Now, that particular leader is generating a very specific culture within this individual's team, and we're trying to unpick that. Now, the way that we're unpicking that is to understand what the rituals are. And to do that, what we've been doing is mapping these flow paths, and what's coming out is really interesting. So, you know, understanding subcultures, that you know, real emic perspective is so incredibly important, because it gives you the human view. That's what's so important about this. So thick description really is summarized in what you've got here. And this is what we do with anthropology, right? This is the power of anthropological techniques, the ones that we're describing today in change and transformation. If we are able to be a participant, if we are able to apply some of those techniques of observation, if we are able to inquire about people's why, so that we can make visible what's invisible and put context of the environment around that, which is the subcultures. So this is why people are saying and doing what they're doing, flow paths, and these are the conditions and the environment that we're seeing in the culture, in the subcultures. This is what we get. We get the ability to talk to human emotion. We get the ability to contextualize truth. We get the ability to apply situational description to a group of humans. And that's so incredibly important, because it takes us away from assuming at the mass. We don't need to do that. So it's really important for us to think about this concept of thick description, and thick description is exactly what you see here. Our ability to explain what people are doing, how they are doing it, as well as why they are doing it, which is their thinking, and then to apply context around it, the conditions and the situation, that thick description, contextualization and situational description. That's what we need to be doing. If we are able to do that, then it doesn't matter how complex, how ambitious our program is, our strategy is, we will be able to meet people where they are at and to accelerate transformation, because we are humanizing the design. No longer will we be delivering Office 365 based on what the technical team are telling us. You know, features and functions will be available. Teams will be available next week, Mel. OneDrive will be available next month, and that's how we're going to deploy Office 365 in the organization. We, as modern transformation practitioners, will be able to say, hang on a minute, now, based on people's stories and their human emotions, based on the cultural contextualization of that group over there and that group over there, and situational description, it won't be that way around. Human first, digital always. So this is the way that we can pivot and turn our transformations around to make them human driven as opposed to technically driven. So as always, that's a little bit about today. So, you know, the 3 techniques of anthropology to really accelerate change and transformation: observation, or otherwise known as ethnographic research. The idea of being able to describe, the idea of being able to prescribe is so incredibly important for us. On today's webinar, as always, I want to share with everybody, if you would like to know more about this, if you want to understand what humanizing transformation is all about, we have, of course, our Leadership and Practitioner Academy that is now live. It is very, very specific to help you as an individual become a competent practitioner in humanizing transformation, to be a role model leader so that we can achieve agile at scale and we are able to accelerate success of transformation. I've popped strategy session link in the chat, so if you'd like to use that link, you can spend some time with me, and that time will be confidential time where we can talk about where you are at now, where you want to be, how do we map to that, where your transformation is now or your program is now, where you want that transformation or program to be, and how we can map towards that. So the process and the program that could potentially get you there. So if you would like to know more, if you'd like to go a little bit deeper, then please do just take advantage of that strategy. So how are you feeling? How are you feeling based on today's little wee webinar, the taster of humanizing transformation? Do you feel that you're kind of getting your head around the observational bit? Do you feel that you're getting your head around the description bit? Do you feel that you can, if you are able to capture that observation, that truth, and that thick description of why, as well as people's how and what? Do you feel that you can put perspective into the human story? So I wonder where we're at with that. I'm going to leave you think about that as I talk to you about this week's banana skins. There's always a banana skin with Mel. Banana skin number 1 is, if we want to apply the techniques of ethnography and anthropology to our transformation, a lack of awareness will scupper us, it will challenge us. So the first banana skin here is when you don't apply time to who you are. Every ethnographer, every anthropologist spends time on who they are, because if they've got self-awareness, they are able to put that to one side and they are able to use that curiosity, that child's mind in their work. So lack of awareness, lack of time in your own personal development is a big banana skin. The second banana skin is this, and I've alluded to it earlier on, and what I mean by that is thinking that this is the work that you do only when you need to do it. The key is, how do we put in place processes and techniques where we are able to consistently and repeatedly monitor and capture this data? So how do we put in place safety transparency, and techniques and processes where we can capture this data on a regular basis in order for us to accelerate transformation and to pivot and iterate as and when we want. So it's not about spiking, right? This isn't the stuff that we only do at the beginning, that we only do at discovery phase or design phase. This is the stuff that we want to be doing all the time. So thinking about how we can do that, and that's my second banana skin for today. Okay, so little bit over in terms of my time. We're a few minutes over 1/2 the hour, and I want to try and keep my chit chatter to half an hour so that we can have a little bit of an open discussion. However, before I close off and open today's leadership roundtable, I just want to remind everybody that was here last week of this. We talked about the 7 mindsets last week, and I said that today we would be launching a 7-day 7 mindset challenge. So we are today going to be launching that. If you want to be a part of it, just pop the word yes or a Y into the chat, and I'll make sure that we add you to the group. And today we're going to be launching a very, very simple 7-day 7 mindset challenge. So if you know the 7 mindsets and you want a little bit of a deep dive, say yes. If you don't really know the 7 mindsets and you want to understand more about them, of course, say yes in the chat, and we'll pop you into that group. It's going to be a really fun challenge. It's only a few minutes every day that we're taking of your time, but I'm sure it will be valuable. So the 7-day 7 mindset challenge starts today. Put yes in the chat. Come on, I want to see everybody do it. No, I'm joking. Do it if you know that you want to be a part of it. That's fantastic. All righty. So what's next for you? Are you going to be applying one of those 3 techniques that we've talked about today? Are you already applying them? Would you like to know a little bit more about them? So that's what I'm going to open up today in today's roundtable. Before I do that, it would be remiss of me to say one thing that's really important. For you to theoretically know a little bit more about what I've talked about today, go and get hold of Practical Ethnography by Sam Lander and Anthrovision by Dilyn Way. 2 fantastic books. 2 absolutely brilliant books. Anthrovision by Dilyn Way is relatively new. It only launched last year. Really great book to give you some practicalities around how you can bring anthropology into the workplace. Practical Ethnography by Sam Lander, equally as fantastic, and it helps you bring the techniques of ethnography into business and transformation. So 2 fantastic books for you to deep dive a little bit more into what we've talked about today. And that's enough from Mel, and I would just like to open today's conversation and just see where's everybody's head at. A little bit cerebral and theoretical today, I know, but where's everybody at? Which one of those 3 areas do you feel that is a little bit more confident at, perhaps? That's a question to start talking about. Or if there's any other open questions or thoughts from the group, just throw them at me. Come on, put it into the table. Oh, I've got some quiet people.
I don't mind, Mel. You know, I'll always speak.
Yeah,
and I
this
suppose
is what we need.
for me, one of the things that really resonated was when you were talking about it's that self-awareness piece, and that being able to put those biases and assumptions aside and be curious like a child, which, you know, we can all say that we think that we do that, but do we truly? And I just wondered if you had any words of wisdom in terms of how to get better at that. And I know it's about your self-awareness and your self-development, but is there anything specifically that you would recommend or advise that might help with that? Because I can see that being the banana skin that would keep coming back again, because you'd almost, you could fall down that hole without even knowing it was there.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lorraine. Probably in and of itself, that's a whole subject for a weekly moment. A really good question. I guess there's a couple of things for me. If you're thinking about personal awareness and deepening, there's 2 words that I would come to. The first word I would come to is purpose, and the second word I would come to is presence. You know, and I think we all owe it to ourselves as modern leaders and practitioners to do a little bit of self-reflection in those 2 areas, because if we reflect upon who we are in terms of our purpose, then, you know, our values and our own belief systems, if we're more aware of that, we can more easily recognize when we're applying bias to others. So the more we know our own beliefs, our own rituals, and our own why, the better able we are to put it to one side, right? So that's really important. But equally, you're right, you know, the most aware, you know, of persons could be triggered in some way, shape or form, and apply bias into a situation and into their work. So that's where the second word, presence, comes into play for me. How do we, whenever we are in this mode of observation, description, prescription, you know, applying anthropology or ethnography, when we're inquiring about people's why, I think it's really important for us to you know, take some time to stop and to become present and then go in. So I think having a stop moment and you know, just taking a couple of minutes and just going, right, okay, you know, remind yourself, put yourself to one side. You know, you know the work that we do. One of our affirmations is, you know, when you want to go into a complex situation and you need to be present, who am I? I am me. Where am I? I am here. You know, the simplicity of those two questions and answers to yourself within a matter of seconds can give you a sense of presence before you go in. And I think, you know, that's really important. So work on your purpose, because it will allow you then to recognize your own rituals, your own why, your own values. You recognize and put them to one side. And equally, just make sure that before you're going into the practicality of this work, that you're not just, you know, headstrong going straight into it without having a stop moment and bringing presence into play before going in. I think those two things for me would be really important. Great question. Really great question. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Got a couple more minutes.
Maybe just a thought based on what you just said, and Lorraine. You know, I think having this self-awareness, of course, and being conscious about what your calling is or your purpose and the rituals that come from that. Absolutely. I think when you're in a corporation, though, and the corporation is undergoing a transformation, you know, all bells and whistles and high-flying purposes and value systems being redefined, and you name it. Yeah. You know, sort of finding the common ground, and that's I think where it becomes difficult, where you sort of need to, you know, navigate the fine lines of personal virtues and corporate value systems, of the why, the big why of the company, which will always be a fluffy one because it has to be so high level that anybody and their mothers can resonate with it, and your personal one, which is not high flying, hopefully, but very personal. So bringing that together is super difficult and super important.
Yeah, that you're absolutely right, Stefan. I mean, it is, and I think that is in part why transformation programs often are separated from business as usual.
Yeah,
because, you know, the sense of the big lofty purpose of why and the vision of the future is so huge, and this is where business as usual is. We couldn't possibly integrate those two things, you know, because the people aren't ready for it, and it's, you know, too risky, etc., which is complete poppycock, to be fair. What we ought to be doing is we ought to be able to break down those lofty strategies into individual human context in the now. And that's what anthropology gives us. That's what it allows us to do. It allows us to help the individual contextualize who they are in the future, which means that we can bring transformation into the now. One thing I will say to you is just a little bit of a technique that we use with, especially if we go into a transformation program that has got this separation, is to do trigger work. And trigger work is fantastic, because what you basically do is you work with teams, and you get teams to say, you know, what my triggers are. And that allows you to get a real quick, rich data bank of why people do things, what they do, etc., etc. So it's the triggers of what triggers me into positive work, what triggers me into negative work. And you ask people to say, list your triggers based on when you are triggered, who triggers you, what triggers you, and where you are triggered, so that you get a real richness. And to do trigger work can give you some very, very quick data in order for you to try to bring those two things together, because you're absolutely right. Those two things can sometimes be so separate, and it's the biggest oxymoron of transformation, isn't it? So really, really good observation there. Thank you, Stefan. Got time for maybe one more question or one more observation, and then we're at the end of today's session. So any question or observation? No? Joanna, I'm going to come to you and ask you a question, if that's all right. You knew I was going to do that. Hey, my question to you is this: of the three elements that we've talked about today, which one do you think is the most practical for you to be able to apply in your system? Oh, you're on mute.
At the moment, it's jumping in and it's participating.
Yeah.
Because, and I resonate what you just said in that previous bit. One question I asked the group yesterday was, what gets your heart pumping? And what can you do to strengthen that? And the output from the group was amazing. More than happy to share it with you, as you know. But it was doing that. And the other thing I'm just going to pick up on was organic growth. So when you bring people up through the journey, that participation, they've already got that. So long as it's recent, don't start saying, well, yeah, but then it was. Yeah. But if it's recent and it's that organic growth, so you've got your your modern leader, and young as in young to participate into it and have that gusto, then I think that's where you can actually capture a lot of power. So that was my question yesterday. What gets your heart pumping, and how do you strengthen that heart?
I love it. There you go, Stefan. That's a great trigger question, isn't it? It's fantastic. I love it. And you're absolutely right, you know, because if we engage humans based on giving them a sense of belonging, you know, they're able to contextualize and connect themselves to transformation. You bet your bottom dollar you're going to get organic growth and shift and momentum. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. That's it. What a great high energy. Thank you, Joanna, for a high energy end to today's weekly roundtable. It's brilliant. Excellent. So everybody, what can I say? Thank you so much for joining today. As always, we're going to be sending out the replay to you all. Every week it's a tiny little element. Next week, we're going to go deep into who we are ourselves, just as a little bit of a teaser. So we're going to be doing some work on who we are ourselves. So I hope you can join me next week. As always, replay, as I say, will be sent through. I'm loving the yeses that I've got already in the chat for the 7-day 7 mindset challenge. Whoop-de-woo, it's launching today. I'm going to be doing it myself with you all. So fantastic. Take care. Think about anthropological techniques. Think about what we've talked about today and how you can apply it to a strategy, how you can apply it to a design, how you can apply it to discovery, how you can start to see the idea of these techniques as consistent data capture. Think about that. There you go. There's a little bit of a challenge for everybody to take away with them for the day. Have a great day, everybody. End of day for one or two of you that I can see online as well in different time zones. Absolutely fantastic. Same time, same place next Wednesday. Come here yourself, bring a mate. Come on, let's get the numbers rolling, and have a fantastic time, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.